open up our next panel discussion, which is on the topic of advancing memorialization and education through digital archives in post-conflict contexts. Okay, great. And I'm going to introduce our three panelists who are joining us for this discussion. First is Gamze Hisli, the Director of Memory and the Peace Studies Program at the Truth, Justice, Memory Center in Turkey. Gamze is one of the founding members of and director of the Memory and Peace Studies Program at the Truth, Justice, Memory Center. She received her BA in Political Science from Middle East Technical University and attended the Cultural Studies MA program at Istanbul Bilgi University between 2003 and 2005. Prior to her work at Truth, Justice, Memory Center, she worked for 7 years in project development and coordination at Anadolu Culture, a civil initiative aimed to build bridges between different ethnic, religious, and regional groups by sharing culture and art. Our second panelist joining us today is Carlos Enriquez Consalvi, or Santiago, who's the founder and director of Museo de la Palabra y la Imagen, or Museum of the Word and the Image, and I apologize for my bad Spanish, from El Salvador. Carlos, or Santiago, was born in the Venezuelan Andes. He studied journalism in Caracas, and in 1972, he traveled to Managua, Nicaragua, to assist victims of the earthquake and to support those victims who were facing challenges due to destruction. Years later, as a journalist, he became involved in the opposition to the Somoza dictatorship. In 1979, after the fall of the dictator, he participated in the foundation of alternative media. In December 1980, Santiago traveled to El Salvador with the purpose of founding Radio Venceremos. Aired in areas under insurgent control, the station remained clandestine for 11 years. After the peace accords, he founded the Museum of the Word and the Image, dedicated to the rescue of Salvadoran culture and historical heritage, with exhibitions and audiovisual productions that tour El Salvador and other countries. He has published several works on historical memory. He received the Prince Claus International Culture Award, and he was a member of UNESCO's Latin American Committee of World's Memory. MUPI, the museum that Santiago founded, is also a member of the International Coalition of Sites of Conscience. And last but not least, I'm pleased to welcome our colleague from the Documentation Center of Cambodia, Ross Sampo, who's the team leader for the Documentation and Democracy Project at DCCAM. Between 1998 and 2007, Sampo worked to document and preserve Khmer Rouge history at the Documentation Center of Cambodia. He managed the documentation team to catalog and input thousands of historical documents, photos, audio, and films from the Khmer Rouge into the organization's database. Sampo also conducted interviews with Cambodian and Cham people who were former Khmer Rouge cadres, victims, and survivors. Between 2007 and 2018, Sampo worked with the Office of the Co-Prosecutors at the UN Assistance to the Khmer Rouge Tribunal and the Office of Co-Investigating Judges, where he serves as a data coder, fact analyst, and research assistant. In 2019, Sampo returned to the Documentation Center of Cambodia, working as the head of the center's archive. In this position, he has worked on collecting, digitizing, preserving, and disseminating the history of the Khmer Rouge regime. And Sampo has been working closely with us throughout this project, as the Documentation Center of Cambodia is, of course, one of the consortium partners involved in the program. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with our first questions for everyone. So I'd like to begin with a question first for Carlos or Santiago. Thank you for joining us. So the question is, the Museum of the Word and the Image was founded in 1996 shortly after the 1992 Peace Accord in El Salvador. Could you please describe the museum's work as it relates to digital archiving, remembrance, and education? How have the uses for your archives changed and evolved over time during the last 25 years? Santiago, over to you.
Bien, buenos días. Un saludo.
Very well, good morning. Greetings to all the participants in this meeting. Also, special greetings to all of the members of RESLAC, the Latin American Sites of Conscience. Today is a holiday. Today, we are commemorating the 25th anniversary of the birth of the Museo de la Palabra y la Imagen. So it's a great holiday to spend with all of you. I must say that the very first archives that were recovered and preserved by the Museo de la Palabra y la Imagen have to do with the internal armed conflict that in El Salvador took place from 1981 to 1992. We, as you heard, are part of a group of journalists that established Radio Venceremos, the radio station, the insurgent radio station that would transmit from the mountains of El Salvador for 11 years. In this time, we began to gather testimonials, photographs, film on this historical stage of social struggle against the 60 years of military dictatorships, emphasizing the testimonials having to do with human rights violations against the civilian population. We were the first to come into the Lozote region, where a counterinsurgents battalion was established in 1981, and that killed 1,000 farmers, amongst them 400 children. These testimonials were disseminated over the clandestine radio station and were subsequently sent to other countries to be preserved until the end of the war. When the peace accords were signed in 1992, we focused on the task of repatriating these archives into El Salvador that had been protected in other countries. After 1992, the Truth Commission was established to clarify the atrocious crimes that were committed by the various stakeholders in the conflict. The Truth Commission addressed our incipient documentation center at the time, requesting oral testimonials and other testimonials that were even filmed using actual film and video. And we came across the difficulty in that these film files, these video files, given the lack of proper preservation over 11 years of war, these files were basically about to disappear. These files had these recordings, these films contained the victims' testimonials, but they had fungus and they were basically impossible to be used by the Truth Commission. So that's when we realized the urgent need to digitize these files so that they could be used as support and as guidance for legal proceedings and reparations. As our colleagues from Memoria Abierta have said, we are institutions with scarce economic resources. We are regular citizens. And currently, or rather at that time, we thought that we should find partnerships to rescue these files that were about to disappear. So in 2006, we established a partnership with the Higher Education and Research Center in Social Anthropology, or CSS, from Mexico, who had our same issue. They had also files that were about to disappear. And the Historical Institute in Nicaragua was another partnership we established, who also had a major archive on education and human rights that were also about to disappear. And there was a third stakeholder in this partnership as well, which was key, and it was the University of Indiana. From this partnership, we were able to establish, well, first, we undertook that process of digitalization for the files that were about to disappear, and then we created a digital repository that would provide access to researchers and truth commissions and judges so that they would have access to these files. Subsequently, we did establish other partnerships here in Central America, such as with the Guatemalan National Police Archives, the Museo de la Palabra de la Imagen, and the University of Texas in Austin, which allowed us to engage in workshops to rescue these files and safeguard these files that were about to disappear. And to also create digital repositories to show our document collections to support education and the education process that the museum leads. And with this partnership, we were also able to show our collections online, our collections of textiles and weaving work that the women engaged in, where they denounced the massacres, they denounced the bombardments in their communities through these textiles, through these weaves, which are similar to the artilleras that they use in Chile. So in response to one of your questions, Sarah, regarding the use of archives to support legal processes, we would highlight the power that photos have in the search for truth around these historical events. One lesson learned that we had was from a judge that is currently prosecuting the perpetrators of a major massacre that took place in Mazote. We were able to provide that court with a photo collection that had been safeguarded on the massacres, and these photos provided clues as to what military units committed genocide against entire populations. To conclude, and to address the matter that brings us here today, which is digital archives and supporting education, on that, I can tell you that given the need to create generational handovers of the human rights work that's been done, generational handovers of the archives and the files themselves, and memory-based initiatives, for that, our museum created an education program for the youth, for those between the ages of 11 and 18. There we have provided workshops that give the youth tools for audiovisual creation and the use of social networks that would allow them to do their own memorial work and to denounce violations against their rights. This has allowed us to engage in that generational handover with the youth who are interested and committed to these matters, and to the youth that are quite drawn to moving images, especially. The most recent case that we've had in digital archiving has been, in fact, under the pandemic. A pandemic that exposed the inequality and the injustice and the rights violations against citizens with the excuse of there being a pandemic. And we've seen this throughout the region. So in that sense, our response was to convene a citizens campaign to gather testimonials around human rights violations under the pandemic. And for that, we have created what we have called the Pandemic Archive that we are now disseminating in digital repositories and also via museum exhibitions showing these human rights violations that have taken place in our societies and worldwide. I think my 7 minutes are up, so I think this is as far as I will go for now. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Santiago, and congratulations on your 25th anniversary for the museum. I had no idea, but I'm so happy that you've decided to share it with us here this morning. So thank you very much for opening the discussion. My next question is for Gamze. So Gamze, one of the long-term goals for the Truth, Justice, Memory Center is to support a process of coming to terms with past human rights violations in Turkey. How has digital archiving supported your efforts in relation to collective memory? And are there any examples you can share of programs that have helped you to reach a broader audience with the documentation you've collected, particularly perhaps a younger generation that may be less familiar with past human rights violations?
Thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you for inviting me to this panel series, in which there are a lot of organizations which inspired us actually before establishing Truth, Justice, Memory Center. And it's always inspiring and encouraging to be in between colleagues. Actually, I realized that I need to say something beforehand because the topic of the discussion is memorialization efforts in post-conflict societies, which Turkey does not belong to. So maybe I should briefly talk about the situation in Turkey before. Starting from the Armenian genocide before the establishment of the Republic of the country, and regardless of 3 military coup d'etats, a lot of serious atrocities targeting minorities of the country, and 40-year-long internal conflict with the Kurdish armed group, which is still going on. Turkey has never went through a transition period, and nor it made any efforts to come to terms with its many pasts. So it's definitely not a post-conflict society. So in a country like Turkey, where the population is divided with very harsh differences, political stance, those atrocities are well known to a small group of people, survivors, victims, maybe leftist groups, but while the rest of the country choose to ignore them. So I would say the basic problem which we tried to encounter while establishing the center was this polarization. So we established Hafıza Merkezi, which is Truth, Justice, Memory Center, in 2011 to contribute to peace and democracy by way of uncovering truth about these gross violations of human rights, supporting survivors in their pursuit of justice, and contributing to dissemination of narratives outside the official discourse. As I said, our aim was to contribute to coming to terms with the past. So the starting point for us, our focus was enforced disappearances, which is a tactic used by the state-sponsored groups, especially during the 90s, when the armed conflict was at its height. So what we did was trying to establish a public digital archive, which maybe I should say database, because it doesn't include any historical documents, actually. It's more like a collection of available documents, which enables us to build the environment of the events that took place. And we also did some field work to interview families of the victims. And we worked with lawyers and bar associations to collect legal files, investigation files, local investigation files, and some decisions at the European Court of Human Rights. Because another topic for us was to show how impunity worked in these crimes. Because it's all about, for the general public, not knowing about anything about these atrocities. So justice was another issue for us. As I said, we did a comprehensive field work, doing more than 250 interviews with victim families, and collected around 350 legal files. And we also collected, we did a research on local media news at the time. We went through archives and collected them. So at the end, we had thousands of documents related to more than 600 enforced disappeared. And then at the time, we made a research of available databases that we could use. And we worked with Huridocs to establish the database. And it was a public database showing all the information we collected, all the interactions with other events, legal phases, etc. So after establishing the database, digitizing the documents, this digitization process helped us reveal a lot of unrecognized patterns with concrete data. I mean, for a group of people in Turkey, it's a well-known fact that enforced disappearance was used in the 90s, but nobody knew those patterns, like paramilitary groups in different locations, the way they act, the tactics they used, or what happened in the legal process, etc. So digitization of thousands of documents and made us able to do some analysis, more in-depth analysis, I would say, and diversify our analysis. So, for instance, we did some territorial and gender-based analysis of the crime. We also did an analysis to reveal justice perception of the survivors, what they understood from justice, what did they want from the authorities, etc. So we published quite a lot of reports around these issues. And we also produced some video excerpts from the interviews to disseminate the findings to a wider audience, because the interviews were very long, like 2.5 hours. So we did some smaller, shorter versions to disseminate. So we also made use of other means and other locations. For instance, we organized national campaigns during the elections and on trial dates, both digital and physical campaigns. we also collaborated with some academicians from different universities and gave lecture series at universities to reach a younger audience. We also organized a hackathon with people from the creative industry to develop dissemination projects using our data. And two of the ideas that came out of this hackathon were also realized afterwards. One was an art exhibition regarding the enforced disappearances, and the other was an alternative digital dictionary of objects from the everyday life of victim families. Like, what does it mean, a door for a victim family of enforced disappearances. We also made an open call to encourage university students to develop and implement their own projects regarding this issue using our data. For instance, one of the participants created a planner notebook dedicated to the memory of the disappeared and published it and disseminated it widely. As I said, we also collaborated with art circles. We participated in an international art exhibition with video excerpts from the interviews, and the exhibition was then traveled to New York. But unfortunately, Turkey started to go through a serious democratic backslide with the collapse of the peace process in 2016. And we had to close down our public database in 2 years later in 2018 because there was a lot of legal harassments, both to us and to victim families. So we tried to use this period in between from 2018 until now to revise and improve our archival material. And we are also in the middle of a migration of data to UASI by, again, ROUGE. And now we are also trying to develop other means and opportunities to reach out to younger generations. So that's all for now from me.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much, Gamze, for sharing your experience with us. And I appreciated the point you added around how the digitization process for you allowed you to recognize different patterns between the human rights violations that were committed across different years, as well as the importance of developing strategic partnerships with artists and other creative individuals, as you mentioned. So thank you for that. My next question is for Sampo. So Sampo, DCCAM has conducted extensive research and outreach activities to raise awareness on human rights violations committed under the KHMER ROUGE regime. How has digital archiving supported DCCAM's efforts to promote remembrance of and education about this period? Are there any successful examples of recent programs involving digital archiving that you could share with us?
Thank you, Sarah, for the question. Good morning, afternoon, and evening from Cambodia, ladies and gentlemen. Now in Cambodia, it's evening. So before I respond to the question, I would like to introduce the establishment of the DCCAM, and then the DCCAM was established by the Yale University in 1995, called Cambodia Genocide Program in the U.S. After the U.S. Congress passed the Cambodian Genocide Justice Act in April 1994. And later after, in 1977, DCCAM became the independent research institute in Cambodia and built a reputation as the international leader in the quest of the memory and justice, which are foundation of the reconciliation. DCCAM is the world largest repository of the Cambodia archive called KHMER Archive, and DCCAM is the non-profit, non-governmental, non-political institute indicate the documenting to the genocide crime history KHMER's regime between 1975 and 1979. Before I'm going to deeply the workflow of the Cambodia, the DCCAM, I would like to share the screen to show you my PowerPoint presentation on the work of DCCAM. So you see, as the DCCAM started the process to work in 1979, DCCAM collect the original document and convert those documents into digitized form, starting firstly from the microfilm and microfiche format, and some of the file in the PDF file. And most of the documents were entered into database step by step. And since 2006, DCCAM has constantly cataloged and digitized those documents into TIFF and the PDF format. And all the documents, basically we collected from the various departments in Cambodia through the DCCAM wrote the legal letter to the government to ask for do research and collecting all the documents relevant to the KHMER history, such as from the Ministry of Interior, from the Front Department, from National Archive, from the Tuxline Museum, and from other scholar and other researcher in locally or from the broad. In terms of the security archive and enhancement, DCCAM also improved the technology based on the improving the technical capacity on the archive management and preservation, as well the digital archive by enhancing the local cloud or the cloud server as well, including the website and database for the public access, both local and remotely. And this work and funded by the USAID that I myself and DCCAM also say thank you to the USAID that provide us the big fund for building the local and cloud storage, including the web database for hosting the historical document relevant to the KHMER regime. Secondly, the DCCAM archive also provide divide the document into the main category because we have the 100,000 of the document consisted of over 1 million pages that relevant to the KHMER historical document cover between 1925 and 1929. And the second one is the kind of the document that was covered between pre-75 and post-79. That is we call human rights document. That is the mixed document relevant to the national international relation between the other country and politics, culture, etc. And these two categories consisted of 1 million over that one pages that we further categorize those into 5 categories. The first one is we call the paper document. This paper document is a kind of the original document that we collected from the confession and from the biography of the Khmer that we collected from other places in Cambodia, while the DCCAM sent the official letter to the government for collecting and researching all the documents relevant to the Khmer history. This kind of the document is the cover page of the confession of the S-21 prisoner who was captured and sent to the S-21 security prison during the Khmer time between 1975 and 1979. And this is the important document that we call the original document, because no any place have that kind of the document. And this is the contain the annotation of the high-ranking leader of the Khmer Rouge, and also the contain the annotation of the chief of security center S-21 and called ROUGE. He was the chief of that security center. His full name is Kang Kek Yêu, and the guy was Cambodian half-blood Chinese, and then he ruled the security center. And this is the original document that DCCAM provided to the Khmer Rouge Tribunal for compile the fact, evidence and legal evidence for make the judgment of the Khmer Rouge leader and the most responsible leader. And second question, the second document is a kind of evidence or physical information that the DCCAM conduct the activity at the other provinces or other local places in Cambodia, that throughout the projects called mapping project that started in 1995, that our colleague went to other places in around Cambodia to collect all the documents relevant to the mass grave and the crime site and security prison, and also conduct interview with victim or survivor of the regime for compiling all the documents that went to the Khmer Rouge history. And the third one is the kind of the interview that the DCCAM also conducted the interview throughout the biography of the former Khmer Rouge member and the victim, that we collected those documents in the country remain from that regime that I told you, that from Ministry of Interior, from the Foreign Department, from National Archive and other places. And then we check, cross out the document to find out the name of the person and birth location, father name, mother name, and then we conducting the research by sending our team to locate all the people through the document we have. And this is the picture of the victim of the S-21 security prison, and while she's captured and then she sent to the prisoner before she was killing. But unfortunately, we don't know the name, but we just found the photo and then we make the catalog this one. And then through this document, we conduct interview both people like survivor and former KHMER member or leader, but that actually DC camp work never make judgment or any consider the people survive from that regime as the victim or perpetrator. We treat the same level, that we never divide those people as the perpetrator or the victim. So that's why we could conduct the interview smoothly by lead the introduction to the people by telling them that this is the research, historical research on the KHMER history. So that's why we would not have any problem with victim or the former KHMER leader. So as a result, we found the information from the survivor, both people, victim and perpetrator. And the fourth one is the photograph. The photograph, we mostly have the photograph that went to the victim, that we contain more than 5,000 photo of the S21 portrait that we start do research document, collected document during the center started. So this one, not only the photo of the victim, but also other photo relevant to the historical event. For example, like the building destroyed by the KHMERs, or the pagoda temple destroyed by the KHMER, and all the Buddha statue was destroyed by the KHMER. This is also a kind of the historical photo that relevant to the KHMER as well, and including the film that also cover the event, the historical event between 25-29 as well. But this photo is a kind of film that my director went to the film department governed by the state, and then he asked the film from the government. So unfortunately, later on, I could not remember the exact year. These all the film relevant to the KHMER historical event disappear from department. I have no any idea, but this one, my director, the man standing behind the man give the back to us there is my director Yuk Chang.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Sampo. You just have about 1 minute left for your presentation.
And so throughout the DCCAM digital archive, we conduct the 5 significant projects like history, justice, memory, and peace, reconciliation, and education throughout the some activity that I will show you. This one is for the historical activity that we went to the field to collect information from the villager, from the witness, from the perpetrators, from the film, and then we compile those documents as the historical information by transcribe those audio file to be the paper document. And the third one, the second one is also the activity justice that the DCCAM provide almost 1 million pages to the court for conduct the fact, evidence, and the legal evidence for the court to make judgment. All KHMER team leader, like we capture 5 team leader, Khmer leader, like the guy is Nunchia, and the guy is the prime minister of the Khmer regime, and this one is the president of the Khmer regime called Khieu Samphan, and this one Doge, this one Doge is the chief of S21 during the Khmer time, and this man is Ieng Sari. He was the minister of the foreign affairs, and the lady is the minister of here and social affairs. So this can provide those documents that we collected from the that time and then sent to the court. And throughout the memory is kind also this can went to the field as well and then conduct interview or tell the people about the Khmer history and by distribute the magazine that published by DCCAM talking about the Khmer history to the old people and the young people to know about the Khmer history and event, and also build the slogan and put in the primary school and high school around Cambodia as well, in order to make the people remember that the event, never forget the past that Khmer conducted the killing site. And for the peace and reconciliation activity, the DCCAM also conduct the research or the interviews throughout the both people like victim and perpetrator as well at the various places in Cambodia provinces, and also lead the youth or the local student to visit the grave of the Pol Pot, who was the prime minister or the president of the Khmer regime, by telling about the process of the Khmer court, and also tell them about the history of the Khmer rules, and also met with the perpetrator or the Khmer rules member by conducted interview about the history or the account of those guys about the regime. And for the education, the DCCAM distribute the book and research paper, and also conduct the student forum or the education to the primary school or no primary school, the high school student about the Khmer history, and not only the Cambodian people, but also the ethnic group like Cham or Muslim ethnic. Also, we invite them to join the rich history forum, and for telling them about the history and distribute all the textbook and research paper relevant to the Khmer regime or the Khmer even to them and to alert them to remember all the history. So this is the kind of the activity that DCCAM spread all the information and document to them by conducting the 5 specific project as I mentioned, and throughout those results that we collect all the document from that regime remain in the country after they fled to the border between Cambodia and Thai border. We also disseminate those to the public throughout the as I told you earlier, the provide a big huge of the document to the Khmer Tribunal, that 2 offices like the court run by the Office of or prosecutor, in co-investigative judges and other partner like different unit, and also conduct the direct induction to the public research like local student or research from the abroad, and provide the access online access to different.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Sampo. I think we'll have to wrap up the response to this particular question now, if it's okay to you, but we'll come back to you with the next question that I'm going to propose.
Thank you.
Okay, and thank you so much. I think that all of DCCAM's different outreach and education programs could easily fill one of our whole sessions. So we really appreciate you sharing those with us. I do know that we're a bit short on time, and I want to make sure that we give a chance to all of our participants here to pose questions at the end of the session. So I'm going to share one general question for all three of our panelists, but I'd ask you to please try to keep your remarks quite brief to 3 minutes at most. So the question I'd like to pose is, for other practitioners interested in using digital archives to advance memorialization in education, are there any innovations or key lessons learned on this topic that you can share based on your experience? And we'll start with Santiago, please.
Bueno, quisiera
Very well. I would like to share one experience in educational processes that the museum has undertaken. And it's been about confronting denialist policies by the government regarding certain aspects of history, and also having to do with human rights violations. One specific experience was one we had with the events of 1932 in El Salvador. The indigenous communities engaged in an insurrection against the taking of their lands for exploitation, for coffee crops, basically. And the dictatorship's response was to gun down over 10,000 indigenous farmers in the entire western region of the country. It was one of the largest massacres against an indigenous population in Latin America. But the government, since the dictatorship and subsequent administrations tried to deny the scale and the causes that led to this uprising. So the museum's experience has been to establish partnerships with youth leaders in these communities to preserve the oral history from these communities. And by preserving oral histories and by establishing digitized files on the oral testimonials from these survivors, that is how we were able to establish museum exhibitions that preserve the oral history in these communities. And we have managed to impact the Salvadorian educational system as well on a subject that had previously been denied and had previously been made invisible, so that now the youth could learn about this in schools. The events of 1932 today are taught in schools thanks to the resources that we have received as support. Thanks to these efforts in digital archives, we have been able to reach the schools, and our movies and our movies and publications on these historical events that were previously denied are now actually in the school curriculum. I think my 3 minutes are up.
Thank you very much, Santiago. And I'm sure if there are perhaps any links that you could share to some of these projects, I'm sure the other participants would be very interested in seeing them. So thank you for sharing that experience. I'd like to now give Gamza a chance to answer the question, if you have any thoughts.
I won't take long because what I will say, I've just said in my presentation already. We are not actually engaged in educational activities, but like many other human rights organizations, we struggle with finding ways to disseminate our work to a wider community. So although digitalization of information increases opportunities, it's hard to reach out to a different circle than the immediate audience of the work we do. So we try to collaborate with artists and creative people to think out of the box, because we always think on what's available to us, and we don't know this whole creative world. So it's always good to engage in with other groups of people from the creative world. So another, I wouldn't say innovation, but I think in this world of vision, videos are very important in disseminating our work. So we try to incorporate video excerpts from our work, our information data. So I would suggest just these two examples. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Gamze. And similarly, if there are any links or projects that you could share with us, we'd be very interested in that. And I appreciate the experience of having to work outside of the formal education system and think about more creative ways to reach audiences. And Sampo, back to you with 3 minutes to share your thoughts in relation to this final question. Oh, I think you're muted, Sampo.
Actually, I have no any question, but I just tell you our challenge on our digitize the document that we have a lot, that the paper document, movie, and audio, and the film that we now preparing to host them on the new database that we are developing those and also the both local and cloud server as well. And then I would like to ask this, any good idea on that technical way that we can do converting our material as the digitized file to posting them into the our database. For example, like now we have the problem with the file that we scan, not only scan from the original one, but probably the to a second copy, that is the image. So when we do the scanning and then we do the OCR, it could not read properly. That is the problem. And one more thing that is the Khmer language, that it is difficult to OCR them. And so this is what we want to know about any participant or organization have a good idea for us to do the digitization or that material, like as what I said. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sampo. Thank you for sharing that question. I think that leads us nicely into our question and answer session. So I'd like to thank all three of our panelists very much, Santiago, Sampo, and Gamze, for sharing your experiences with the group. And I think now we'll take about 10 or 15 minutes just to see if any of the other participants have questions that you'd like to pose to our three panelists or to our colleagues from Memoria Abierta who joined us for the keynote session. And if anyone has thoughts they'd like to share in response to the challenges that Sampo mentioned in relation to the digitization process, you're welcome to share those as well. So you can raise your hand either with your camera on or using the raise hand function in Zoom. Peja, yes. Do you have something?
Yes, I'm sorry if there is no one else with questions. I would just like to ask Gamze, sorry, if she can just tell a few more words on this. She can mention this kind of dictionary of violation. Just how was it distributed? What was the form? And just a few more words about it. Thanks.
Sure. Actually, it was not a physical dictionary, it was a digital one. And the artists used our interviews to decide which objects to use. They made a word research on the interviews and then take out the words they would like to represent and made some more interviews with the victim families. It was a website and we used the entries also on our social media accounts. The dictionary also included, since there were artists, some drawings of the objects and their normal dictionary meanings and meanings to the victim families.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Are there any other questions for our panelists or speakers? If not at the moment, I have a question I'd like to pose to Santiago. Santiago, I know you mentioned working with fabric and weaving as, in a way, sort of cultural documents of the social struggle that had taken place. I was curious if you could explain a little bit more about how you worked with these pieces of fabric, these textiles and weavings as part of your broader sort of archival work.
Sí, como les había mencionado.
Yes, as I mentioned, during the years of the armed conflict, the internal armed conflict in El Salvador, the women who were in the shelters in Honduras under the protection of ACNUR also began to weave, and they were denouncing human rights violations. So with the words, they could not convey that. These massacres that they were doing in Salvador. So they began to weave these flour sacks, and they had like scenes where they were denouncing the bombardings and the massacres, and these products were disseminated all over the world because everyone who was going through these different UNHCR shelters were taken to United Nations in Geneva or the Red Cross. So the museum did a campaign through Facebook and Twitter, and we managed for these elements of the feminine memory to go back to the country. And then at this time, we are showing these weaves and textiles, and then we're going to celebrate the 25th anniversary of the museum. And we're going to take these exhibitions of the feminine memory or the female memory to the Reina Sofia or Queen Sofia Museum, and then the University UNAM in Mexico. So this work has given us a lot of strength. And as one of the women said, hope comes from memory.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. Well, we look forward to seeing it as that exhibition is coming together. Are there any other questions for our panelists or for our keynote speakers before we? Yes, Jose.
Yeah, hi. Currently, I'm working with FAFG in Guatemala. Before I worked some time with Historical Archive of the National Police. And I could say that both organizations, with their specificities, they conduct research from the document they archive. So my question is to the colleague from Argentina, Memoria Abierta. I'm wondering why, if they still think that with the knowledge that the organization has about the document they archive, they feel like, why do they keep on the decision not to conduct research from within? I mean, why does Memoria Abierta does not research from the document they archive? They explain that they prepare documents for the researchers to come and use them, but they do not conduct research from their. And I'm curious about that decision.
Please go ahead, Selena. Yes.
Sorry, I'm going to speak in Spanish because it's more easy for me. A ver, no es que hay una decisión explícita de no hacer investigación.
It's not that there is an explicit decision not to do any research. There is an explicit decision and technical decision that before the investigation, what we need to do is to take awareness in terms of the preservation of the documentary archives. So there is an intention there and a foundational goal that's very different between what Open Memory or Memoria Abierta is and the people from the Legal and Social Studies Center of Argentina, which is an organization of attorneys that do strategic litigations, among others, to cover the difference. So Memoria Abierta, that's part of Memoria Abierta, but it was created with the intention of the organizations to generate mechanisms for preservation of the documentation and to generate tools for memory. And therefore, since it was one of the, well, there were three main streams in terms of how or what actions needed to be taken to work for memory. Memoria Abierta is created 20 years after, well, maybe a bit less, 18 years after the end of the dictatorship. So there's a period after, but the main goal had to do with the pedagogy, with preservation, with memory. So on that point, three main streams of action have to do with preservation of the documentation created by the organizations in their fights and their struggles throughout the dictatorship and afterwards in the preservation. Also the creation of new sources of information, like Vero said, the oral archive, and the creation of tools in terms of the reconstruction of the clandestine centers that for the time there was still a lot of information missing. So it's not that there's no actions for investigation, but at some point, what we have in terms of open memory is, or Memoria Abierta is, the initial goal to work systematically in the preservation of these documentary archives to give access. This is one of the most important things, to give access to these sources in terms of allowing investigation, academic, judicial. We are an archive that is queried by the justice process, by victims, by the academia. But I think that Memoria Abierta is a base, and we believe it's the path. So we also encourage other organizations to look at the archive from that standpoint. In Argentina, particularly, there is a an exception, or rather, there is an interpretation that the archivists are in civil society. In other countries, we're working a lot with Colombia, where archivists are almost exclusive to the state. So it's seen as something very bureaucratic in that sense. But what we think is fundamental in terms of, even I as a historian have to say it, to face investigation or research, you need to have that idea of reconstruction of the context of how those sources were produced. And that is what Memoria Abierta does as one of our mottos. It's not that we don't do any research, it's that all the resources that we use, we did one on the World Cup in Argentina during the military dictatorship, the justice processes we're working on the women's movement. So we do all that investigation, but what we mean is that we do it as a second step, and the first step has to do with trying to preserve or identify and recreate the context of production of everything we have. So at some point, it's not that we don't do it, but we just don't do it as a single action or activity. And again, we believe these prior practices we mentioned are necessary for those investigations done by the organizations, produce sources for other organizations. When you systemize and when you organize and recreate, these are things that are going to help everyone and forever. Instead, when you are in a hurry and say, well, you have the goal to do this research, judicial investigation, etc., then this brings information, but you're not collecting a lot in terms of where did it come from, how did it work. You know, sometimes this is difficult to make it part of another process. So again, I'm insisting, it's not that we don't do investigation or research, but our main goal is to enable the documentation that exists on the period of the dictatorship and democratic transition so that others can have access. I would add to what Selena said, it's also true that in the case of Argentina, the research of these events has been greatly in the hands of the justice system. So in reality, as Selena said, our work has helped for judges and prosecutors to consult the information we have at Memoria Abierta and use it in the justice processes. And also to be used, as we said, in other multiple processes of memory, education, pedagogy. But as Celine said, there is, in that sense, a matter of the seasonality, so to speak, in terms of it's important to consider, and that's why we said at the beginning, the context of each country. In the case of Argentina, we can have the luxury of having an organization like Memoria Abierta doing this type of work that is so thorough on the archives, and this also fosters or enables for the academia, researchers, investigators, judges, prosecutors, teachers to use this documentation that is systemized and with open memory for the public officials and different uses.
Thank you, Veronica and Selena, and thank you, Jose, for the question. Santiago, did you have your hand raised? Did I see before? Did you have a question or a comment?
Sí, solo un minuto.
Just 1 minute, if you can give me, to emphasize the importance of digitalization of files or archives with two very specific cases. The archive that the Association of Mothers and Prisoners and the people who disappeared or were displaced, disappeared persons, and these were kept at their homes these archives are in danger of disappearing if they haven't already disappeared. There's also the case of the National Police of Guatemala that you already know, how the Guatemalan state has done everything in its power to avoid the use of these archives in legal proceedings. However, there's hundreds of thousands of documents. The International Police Archive, it's been digitized and it's online. So I just wanted to highlight the importance of these archives in digitization for their preservation in cases where there's countries where there is persecution, denial, and they're very vulnerable organizations of mothers, of disappeared persons, and political prisoners.
Yes, okay. Last comment from Selena.
Yeah, just to add to what Carlos said, the first day we had the presentation from Gustavo Meonio from the Historical Archive of Guatemala. And it's important not to believe that there's tension between working with some archive and digitizing it. So attention is in terms of emergency, but it's important, as Gustavo said, as they did in the police, it's important to know that before digitizing, you need to have a previous sequence. Otherwise, you're going to have a lot of electronic files, and it's happened to many of us when you just digitize files, and then if you don't do it with a sequence within a framework or context, and it doesn't have to be so elaborate, but if you don't do that, that documentation is going to lose its certification for legal proceedings. So again, we can't think that, I think that there's two myths at one point. There's a lot of experiences, which is, one is to think about the tension between the description and the comprehensive treatment of archives and digitization. We've tried to show that you could do both things, but on the other hand, there's a lot of tension between the treatment of document archives and also there's things that you can't find. For example, police files, you can't find them. So you need to digitize them so that the justice can have it available. Well, at one point, there is a possibility in the previous steps, in the tools and context of work on the documentation, that are fundamental to guarantee that this digitization process works. So again, just to bring that, and sorry to the translators if I spoke too fast.
No problem. Thank you, Selena. And yes, I think that that's something that has come up in our previous discussions as well, that the need for planning and forethought, even in these sort of emergency situations where documents are at risk of being lost if they aren't digitized. So I think that that's an important point for us to conclude this panel discussion with. And I would just like to thank once again all three of our panelists and our two keynote speakers for sharing examples of their work and showing how digital archives can contribute to this process of establishing collective memory around the truth of past human rights violations and sharing that history with a larger audience. So now I think everyone could use a little bit of a break, some coffee, tea, a stretch. So I'll suggest that we come back in about 10 minutes at 25 past the hour. You don't need to disconnect from the Zoom meeting. You can just turn off your sound and your video, and we'll see you all at 25 past for a plenary discussion. Thank you.